Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of College and Career Pathways, where every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m., we provide you with information on various colleges and universities, financial aid resources, skilled trade professions, technical and training opportunities, career readiness skills, all designed to help you make the best career decisions possible. I'm Tony Curtin, your host, and today we are with MI Student Aid. Hi, Emily, welcome back. We are going to be talking about FAFSA or Financial Aid 101. Thanks so much for joining us, Emily. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Hurtado Arboleta. So here on behalf of the Michigan Department of Treasury, my student aid, and as Ms. Curtin mentioned, here to talk through some things in the financial aid process. So our financial aid 101 is going to provide an overview of the following topics. So we'll kind of talk through each of these. I'll say too, feel free, I may ask some questions along the way just to kind of get an idea of where you might be at in the college planning process. And I know we might have, students kind of joining us as they come. I think I saw Jana in here. So feel free, send any responses in the chat and feel free to put any questions in there as well. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So just to get started, I would love to have an idea of maybe some of the institutions that you might be considering. So if you have some schools that maybe you've already applied to, or maybe you've got some schools kind of in your mind that you're thinking about, if you could just drop it in the chat, that way I've got an idea of where you all are considering going. And then I can kind of make sure that I'm drawing on, some of those examples. If you're not sure, yeah, no worries. Then just let me know. Hey, I'm still weighing my options. I don't know yet. So thanks, Cheryl, for letting me know. And feel free, if there are certain schools you're thinking of, definitely I'm going to give you some kind of tips, things to consider as you're weighing out those options. So institutions that you might be considering, I'm going to put 3 different options on the screen for you. So you'll see we've got community colleges, we've got public colleges or universities, and then we've also got private colleges or universities. Now, you'll notice that first bullet point talks about average COA. Now, COA stands for cost of attendance. And these numbers that you see for those 3 options are the cost of attendance for an entire academic year. Now, when you look at things like option 1, community colleges, you can see that that's the most cost effective when we look at the 3 COAs of these different institution types. But you'll notice too that at community colleges, they're going to offer a lot of associate degrees, so 2-year degrees, certificate programs, maybe even some licensing programs. And I always tell students, if you're not sure what you might want to study, and or if student loan debt is something that's really at the forefront of your mind, definitely take a look at your local community college, because you may be able to do those first 2 years of college at a much lower or cheaper rate, cheaper cost of attendance, and then look to maybe transfer to what you see as option 2 or option 3 on your screen. So public colleges and universities, as well as private colleges and universities, they're all going to offer a lot of 4-year degrees, so bachelor's degrees. Also, some may offer 2-year degree programs. So it really just depends on the institution. But in general, you're going to see a lot of 4-year degree programs and graduate programs. So anything after that 4-year degree. Now, notice that the cost of attendance is significantly different, right? Between option 2 and option 3. We know that private colleges and universities tend to be more expensive. But what I will say is there are decisions you can make when you're on campus, such as your meal plan or maybe where you live, your room and board, that could help reduce that cost of attendance. And as we move through the presentation today, I'm going to talk through different sources of financial aid that can help pay for school. So let's get to it with our sources of financial aid. So there's 4 different sources or 4 different places where you all can find financial aid. So money to help pay for college. The first source is the federal government. So a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to talk through some of those specific federal aid programs. The second is the state. So the state of Michigan, we offer our own financial aid programs. And again, a little bit later, I'm going to show you what all of those programs are. There'll be some helpful QR codes on the screen so that you can go to some of our publications. And we'll talk again through those state aid programs a little bit later. The third is the institution itself. So for some of you who might be thinking about that local community college, keep in mind that the community college will have its own financial aid, just like a 4-year like Wayne State will have their own financial aid programs for their students. Also, a community college like Washtenaw Community College will have their own financial aid or institutional aid for their students. The last source is private or third parties. So we're going to talk through things like associations, foundations, clubs, maybe even your employer. They might offer different financial aid. It's often in the form of scholarships or grants. But think about those local foundations, those local organizations, could be your church. And then a little bit later, I'm going to show you one of our tools that we have available on our website to help you in your scholarship searching. So we talked through those 4 sources of financial aid. Now let's talk through the different types of financial aid. So the first type is free money. So hopefully I got your attention on that. That's money that you don't have to pay back. So think of this as scholarships and grants. So you've probably been hearing these 2 words a lot when it comes to college. So in this free money category of financial aid, scholarships, the difference here between scholarships and grants are that scholarships tend to be merit-based, meaning they're looking at maybe some type of accomplishment. It could be a certain GPA, or maybe you held a position on the honor society. Maybe you're a member of your local 4-H. It could be any number of things. Scholarships are very vast, and they can cover a variety of topics. And again, I'll show you our scholarship search tool a little later that will maybe help pinpoint or help identify some of those scholarships in your community. Now, grants tend to be need-based. And what this means is we want to see, or that particular grant program wants to know that that student demonstrates financial need. And the way that that is determined is through your FAFSA. So you're going to start hearing me say this word a lot as we progress through the presentation, but that's just to hit home to you how important and how critical the FAFSA is. So that's scholarships and grants under free money. Now let's talk through this next type of financial aid, and that's earned money. So I don't know if any of you have heard of work study, but this is part-time employment to help pay for college expenses. And this is through the federal government. So remember I said the federal is one source of financial aid. So work study is through the federal government. And we'll talk through this a little bit more a little later in the presentation, but this is a form of earned money. So if you're found to be eligible for work study, and that is again through your FAFSA. If you demonstrate need, then and you're eligible for work study, then we definitely want you to consider that in your package. And again, we'll talk more about earned money or work study later. The last type of financial aid is borrowed money. So, of course, some of you have probably heard of loans, student loans. So, as much as I hope that none of you have to take out student loans, I do think it's really important that you at least know some important things to consider, some best practices if you do have to take out any student loans. So, keep in mind that loans have to be repaid, right? This is money you're borrowing, and in some cases, you have to repay that money with interest. So, meaning you might have taken out a $2,000 loan, but maybe now with interest, it's a $2,200 loan. So, we'll talk a little bit later about some different loan types. And again, just things to consider if you are kind of weighing out your options. So FAFSA. Now I want to say for any of these types of financial aid that we just talked about, in order to be considered for these, you have to complete a FAFSA. So sometimes students ask, why is a FAFSA so important? And it's important because it's your key to any of this free money, any of this earned money or borrowed money that's available to you. So if you want, to be considered for all types of financial aid, you definitely want to get that FAFSA in. Now, students, I don't know if you want to drop in the chat, let me know if you have already completed your FAFSA. Let me know if maybe you haven't, if you're waiting. If you think maybe you did, but you're not sure. So FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So again, this is that application, this is that form that you're going to complete to be considered for different types of financial aid. Now, oh, and thanks for responding to my FAFSA question. So this will be really important information for you all about what FAFSA is and where you go to get started. So as I mentioned, FAFSA is that free application for federal student aid, and you start here at the FAFSA.gov website. So when you start here as a new student, you're going to be prompted to create what we call an FSA ID and password. So think of this like a username and password. Students, you'll go in, you'll create that, and then you'll be able to start your portion of the FAFSA. So there's a variety of questions. They're going to want to know things like demographic information, where you live. They're going to want to know what high school you go to. They're going to also want to know any colleges or universities that maybe you're interested in attending. Also, they're going to ask some other questions in order to determine things like dependency. So I'll talk more about this later, but for most students, they're going to be deemed dependent students. And what that means is you're going to need your parents' information for your FAFSA. So just like I mentioned, students create an FSA ID and password. Your parent, if you're a dependent student, also creates an FSA ID and password because your parent will have a piece of the FAFSA that they also complete. So you see there's a couple different things working. You've got the student piece, you've got the parent piece, and then I'll talk in just a few slides about those students who maybe qualify as independent students and how that looks for the FAFSA. But this is where you're going to start, students. You're going to answer some of those questions. And I will say, I know sometimes the FAFSA feels a little intimidating, but know that it's actually pretty intuitive. It's pretty user-friendly, and most students and families get it done in, about an hour, hour and a half. So it helps to have your social security number handy if you have it. And it helps to just have some of that other information, especially for your parents, things like income, taxes, students, if you worked, in this last year in 2020, excuse me, because they're a year behind, then they're going to ask for some of those W-2s. So don't worry, as you work through it, they're going to ask different questions. There's question marks along the way that will let you know. It's like a little kind of icon. You can click there, and that will give you kind of more information about that question. So this is kind of what FAFSA looks like, where you start. They're also going to have you put in, your state, because there's different state aid and state deadlines that will be there. And don't worry, I'll talk to you about the state aid and the state deadlines right now. So some quick FAFSA facts. FAFSA is free. So remember, it stands for free application for federal student aid. So you don't ever pay for the FAFSA. FAFSA can be completed online. That's how most students do it, but there's also a mobile version as well. So I always tell students, whether or not you're doing it on the computer or on your mobile device, just make sure you're on a safe and secure network, because you are going to be putting information in like your date of birth and other important info, address. So just make sure you're on that safe and secure network. Now, FAFSA does have to be completed every year. So every year that you're in college, you're going to complete that FAFSA. And sometimes students say, well, why? Why do I have to do this every year? Well, the main reason is because things can change, right? Your financial situation can change. Also, they pay attention to things like the number of family members in your household, the number of students in college. So they want to take all of that into account, and they know that from year to year, circumstances can change. So that's why you'll do that FAFSA every year. And that's just another reason why it's so important to keep your FSA ID and password in a safe and secure place. That way you can use it again that next year, because that's what you'll have to do. And it can be a bit of a pain if you lose or misplace that. Now, I mentioned there are state of Michigan financial aid programs that have a FAFSA deadline. And there's two programs that have that deadline of March 1st. So that's coming up. That's tomorrow. I can't believe it. It's already March. But those two programs are the Michigan Competitive Scholarship and the Michigan Tuition Grant. So those are our two state of Michigan programs that have the March 1st deadline for priority consideration. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a little bit more info about those programs later in case you might be eligible for those. Now, the 2022-2023 FAFSA is available. So it's been available since October 1st. So for any of you who might be saying, well, I haven't gotten to the FAFSA yet, is it too late? I would tell you, no, it's not too late. But you definitely want to get it in as soon as possible. And that's why, or the reason I say that is because remember all of those different types of financial aid that I talked about? You've got scholarships and grants through the federal government, through the state, through the institution, through private or third parties. You have work study. So once students start applying to school and being accepted, they start accepting those different awards, and the money in those different programs starts to go. So what I mean by that is, if you wait a long time to complete your FAFSA and make that decision, there might be less aid available to you. So for you to have as much financial aid available as possible to help pay for school, I just always recommend getting that FAFSA in as soon as possible. So again, don't worry if you haven't done it yet, there's still time. And, it'll again, each year, so next year for class of 2023 and older students, that'll be available on October 1st. So October 1st of each year. Now, we talked about FAFSA, how you're going to complete the form, you're going to answer some different questions. If applicable, your parent will answer some different questions. And so you might be wondering kind of what happens after that. So all of that information that you put within your FAFSA, that's going to be sent to the federal government first, and they're going to go ahead and process your FAFSA. And then once they're done, you're going to receive a notification of what your estimated family contribution is, or EFC. So I don't know if any of you have heard of EFC before, but this is a number. And EFC is used to determine the different types of financial aid you're eligible for. So remember when I talked about how FAFSA was the key to any of those kind of scholarships, grants, need-based things, they're looking to see what's your EFC at? Are you eligible for some of these different types of aid? Now, it's important to mention that EFC is not the amount that you and your family need to pay up front. So I know I had a student the other day who reached out to me and his EFC was 14,000. And in his email, he said, Emily, oh my gosh, it says 14,000. Like my family and I can't pay that out of pocket. And I had to tell him, like, it's okay. That's just, that's just an estimate. Wait to get your award letter. So once you've been accepted and you've said, yep, I'm going to attend, you're going to receive an offer, and you're going to be able to look at that offer and kind of see, what can that school do for me? So even though that student's EFC was 14,000, he might see, based on his offer or award letter from that school, he might see that he's eligible for some additional scholarships, maybe some additional grants to help pay for school. So just don't let that EFC number, freak you out too much. There are a lot of variables that impact EFC. So I put just a few up on the screen for you, but things like income. So remember I said students and parents, they're going to look at that income. Family size, they want to know number in college. So you might have, an older brother or sister that's in college too. They want to take all of that into account. And then also things like amount paid in taxes. So sometimes parents will say, why do they need all this information? This feels really intrusive. I'm sharing a lot of really personal info. Sometimes parents will say, well, if I fill this out, does that mean that like I'm on the hook for my students' loans? I'm responsible for their loans. That is a huge, huge myth. That's not the case, and it's important for you to let your parents know that the reason you need that information is so you can be considered for financial aid. So things like scholarships and grants to help pay for college. So just, dispelling a few myths that are out there as well. Now, there is such a thing as an independent student. So remember earlier when I mentioned that for most students, they're considered dependent, meaning they're going to need parent information for their FAFSA. And don't worry, the FAFSA is going to ask you some different questions in order to determine what your dependency status is. So don't worry, students, you'll answer some different questions, and that will kind of help guide you along the way. But there is something called an independent student. And so an independent student could be one of the following, and I'm just going to put a list up on the screen for you just to give you some examples. So it could be a student who's a little bit older, who's maybe 24 or older. They're going to be an independent student. It could be a student who has children or dependents. It could be a student who's considered an emancipated minor, or a student who might be homeless or at risk of homelessness. Also students who have experienced time in foster care. And you'll see there's a question on there about if you've experienced time in foster care at the age of 13 or older. So that will help in order to determine your dependency. And then you'll notice the last bullet point says determined by financial aid administration due to unusual circumstances. So I want to give you an example. I was working with a young man on a college campus who had shared with me that although on paper it looked like him and his, that his mom and dad made a good amount of money and were doing well financially, he shared that his dad struggled with a gambling addiction. And that even though it looked like they had a lot of money coming in based on taxes and income information, that in reality, there were a lot of things kind of going on within the home that were affecting him. And not just financially, but also, emotionally as well. And so through those conversations, we then set up a meeting with the financial aid office at that particular college that he was attending. And through those meetings, he was able to share information with the financial aid office about what was going on. And they did ask for additional documentation. They wanted some letters from folks who could verify what he had been sharing, what he had been experiencing. And then that financial aid office at that school made the determination to change his dependency from a dependent student to an independent student. But that was really their call. And that was really as a result of the student really advocating for themselves. So I know that sometimes students will say, my parents refuse to provide their financial information. I want you to know, as you move through the FAFSA, there is a question that I believe has that box. It has a checkbox next to it. And so I would just say, if you're running into that, if maybe your parents are giving you pushback or they're telling you, no, we're not going to provide that information, I would just advise you, to indicate that on the FAFSA via that checkbox. And then to follow up with your financial aid office. So maybe once you determine that college or university you're thinking of attending, I would recommend following up or meeting with the financial aid office just to kind of talk through why, your parent might have been, uneasy or not able to provide information, because there's a lot of reasons for that. So I would just encourage you to kind of talk through that with the financial aid office. And then just keep in mind that the financial aid office, of course, might be able to make a determination, something like that we would call a professional judgment. So that financial aid office might be able to reevaluate, the different responses that you had on your FAFSA. They might be able to reevaluate the financial aid, that you were eligible for. But really, it's about kind of starting there and inquiring with that financial aid office. But yeah, if you can get your parents to do their piece of the FAFSA, that's going to make things a lot smoother along the way. But if for any reason, you're just unable to get that info, again, then I would recommend talking to that financial aid office. So I gave you that example of the professional judgment, right, with the young man who shared what was going on within his family unit. And so I would just say that if you think that you might fall into one of these special circumstances where, you want to at least be able to share this information with your financial aid office, I would encourage you to definitely advocate for yourself, reach out to the financial aid office and share some information. What I have on your screen are just some, at the bottom are just some special circumstances, some examples, but this is by no means an all-inclusive list. So there's a lot of things that could potentially fall into that special circumstances category. And again, follow up with your financial aid office if you're unable to get parent info for FAFSA, or if maybe something's just come up within the family that you think would be important to mention. I will just say, if you don't mention it, then that office has no idea, right? So if that student had never said anything about what was going on, with his dad struggling with, the gambling addiction, if he had never shared that with me, no one would have known that, right? There's no way for the financial aid office to know. So I would just encourage you, to share that. Now, some of you might be wondering, what parent information do I include on the FAFSA? So based on your parents' marital status, that's going to dictate what you do or what parent information you include on the FAFSA. So what I have up on your screen now is our helpful chart. So I would say if you want to snap a picture, feel free to. You'll notice on the left-hand side, it has parents' marital status. And then on the right-hand side, it has the FAFSA action. So for instance, that first line, parents are married to each other, then you're going to need both parents' information for your FAFSA. Now, if your parents are legally separated or divorced, we say use the custodial parents info. Now, what we mean by custodial is that parent that you reside with. So that parent that you're residing with, that maybe you're living with the majority of the time, you're going to use that parent's information. So definitely use this chart to kind of help guide you. And if you have any questions, about whose info to use, feel free to take a look at this chart. Now, federal aid programs. So remember earlier when I talked about those different sources of financial aid, the federal government was the first source we talked about. So I'm going to put up on your screen some of our different federal student aid programs. Now, some may look familiar. We talked about work study earlier, but some might be new to you. You'll notice there's a few in here that have to do with education. So if you were going into the education or teaching field, you'll notice there's a few different grants there. You'll notice at the bottom, there's different things about loans. So we're going to talk through these different loan types. But I want to spend time talking through this first one on the list, and that's the Pell Grant. So keep in mind that federal grant aid does not need to be repaid. So federal grants don't need to be repaid, but federal loans need to be repaid. It's just kind of a helpful, tip there. So when we're thinking about the Pell Grant is the largest grant that the federal government administers. And to be considered for Pell, again, students, you got to get that FAFSA in. And for families that are making less than $26,000 a year, they're going to automatically receive a 0 EFC. Remember EFC, estimated family contribution? So those students will receive a 0 EFC. And what that's going to mean is for those college-bound students, they're going to be eligible for the maximum amount of the federal Pell Grant. And for this last academic year, or this academic year we're currently in, those students who are Pell eligible, they received $6,495. So students who received the max amount of Pell received that amount of money. So think about $6,495 if you were eligible for Pell. Think about how much on that first slide that I had up about the cost of attendance at community colleges. For a year, it was a little over 12,000. So just getting something like Pell could help cut the cost of attendance in half. And this is just one, type of financial aid. So that was the Pell Grant. Now let's talk through federal work study. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to talk through work study a little bit more, because I've worked with students in the past who, as they were getting ready to come to the college campus, they were reviewing their financial aid package, and I'm looking and seeing that they declined work study. So I would ask them, why did you decline work study? You were eligible. And oftentimes those students would say, well, I didn't really know what it was. So I just declined it. So I really want you all to know what work study is so that at least you're making an informed decision and you know what it is they're offering you. So federal work study, again, is part-time employment to help with college expenses. So basically on every college campus, they're going to have a listing of work study jobs, and those jobs are right there on campus. I've seen students work in the rec halls. I've seen students work in the dean of students office. I've seen students work in the dining halls. It really is a wide variety of different jobs. And when we say part-time, don't think of that as like 20 hours a week. I've seen students work at work study jobs for 6 hours a week or 8 hours a week. The great thing about work study is that you're getting that regular paycheck, right? And the federal government's saying, we hope that you're going to use this money to help pay for college, but it's to your discretion. So use it how you will. So for students, it's an opportunity for you to get some on the job, work experience, get a regular paycheck, so get some extra spending money in your pocket, and again, just build on that experience. So be able to work on an on-campus job where they know you're a student and they'll work around your class schedule while you also get some work experience in. So I would say, again, if you get your award letter, you get that offer letter from the school, and you're looking and you're seeing work study, at least consider it, because again, it's a type of earned money, and just some extra money in your pocket to help pay for school. So federal student loans. So I said I would just give you kind of some tidbits, some best practices, some things to consider if you do have to take out a loan. Now, loans are super boring, let's be real, but they are super important. And I want to share some things with you that weren't necessarily shared with me when I was in your position. So let's just give kind of a general overview of a subsidized versus an unsubsidized loan. These are the two loans that you're going to see most often. And again, if you have some unmet need, meaning maybe you have $3,000 left over that can't be covered by scholarships or grants, you don't have enough aid to cover that remaining 3,000, you may have to look at a subsidized or unsubsidized loan. So when we look at a subsidized loan, the big thing here is that the government is going to pay that interest on that loan while you're enrolled. So the government's going to pay that and take care of the interest while you're in school. So that's a good thing. That's what we like about subsidized loans. In an unsubsidized loan, the student is responsible for all interest on that loan. So that means I might take out that loan, right? And I'm still in class, but that loan has already been taken out. Interest has started accumulating. So at the end, I'm going to be responsible for that $3,000 loan plus any remaining interest. So if we look at these two different loan types, subsidized loan versus an unsubsidized loan, I always recommend you go with the subsidized loan first. Let the government pay that interest, right? It's going to be less money for you in the long run. The last type of loan is what we would call a plus loan or a parent plus loan. And this is available for undergrads and grads. The big difference here is that the parent is the loan holder, meaning the loan is in the parent's name. So the parent's going to be responsible for repayment of this loan. They're going to be a co-signer. Now, I always tell students, this loan option is worth exploring if your parents are open to that. Me personally, my parents said, Emily, we support you, but any loans you take out will be in your name. So I didn't really have that option, but if your parents are open to at least looking into that, it's worth exploring. So, some factors to consider if you do have to take out a loan. So, the first is thinking about your monthly loan payments, right? Your monthly loan payments shouldn't be greater than 10% of your monthly take home pay during your first year post graduation. So, just keeping in mind, like, hey, once I graduate, and I got to start paying these loans back, I want to make sure that my loan payment isn't more than 10% of what I'm bringing home from my pay. Another way to think about it too is that your total loan debt should not exceed your projected first year post graduation salary. So just to give you an example, like I have a friend who she took out close to like $80,000 in student loans. And she knew that when she graduated, she was going to be in a career where she was going to make around 55,000 maybe in her first year. So taking out 80,000 and then knowing you're going to be in a career where you're going to make around 55,000 that first year, that's a big hole to climb out of, right? Like you've got other bills to pay. So just keeping in mind that total amount of student loan debt that you might be taking out, and how that looks in comparison to what you're going to make in your first year after you graduate. Oh, I went too fast through the last one. Sorry. And then just keeping in mind about, loans like federal loans versus private loans. So you're going to have private loan companies that are going to offer you loans too. But it's important for you to know that for federal loans, you often have a better interest rate and then you often have repayment options. So better repayment options, things like the public student loan forgiveness or income-based or income-driven repayment plans. So just to give you an example, when I graduated from college, I was still lifeguarding. So that's what I did throughout college. And it took me about 11 months to find a job in my career field after I graduated. So I continued to work as a lifeguard. But after 6 months after graduation, the loan company said, like, okay, Emily, it's time to start paying. Well, I wasn't making a lot as a lifeguard, and my loan payment was like over $200 a month. And I was like, wow, how am I going to keep up on this? Well, because I had federal loans, I was able to call and talk to them about something called an income-based repayment plan. And that allowed them, I sent them my pay stubs. They were able to look and see what I made as a lifeguard. And then they adjusted my monthly payment based on what I was making. So my payment went from over $200 a month to I think like $24 or $25 a month. So much more manageable, much more doable. And a lot of that was because I had federal loans. So I had these other options. And one last thing that I'll just share that I know isn't up here, but I think it's just really important to let you all know. And that is that if you do have to take out loans, so again, you have that unmet need that you have to, take out some loans to cover that. Just keep in mind to only borrow what you need. And what I mean by that is if all you need is 3,000, the school may offer you 6,000. And it's really tempting to say like, oh, why don't I just take that 6,000? Then I'll have an extra 3,000 in my pocket, for spending and for other things. But at the end of the day, a loan's a loan and you're going to have to pay that money back. So I would just really recommend that you only borrow what you need, no matter how tempting it is to have some extra money. Only borrow what you need to cover those expenses at school. So we talk through those federal options, right? Now let's talk through state financial aid programs. So we've got 7 different state financial aid programs. Most of ours are need-based. So what that means is you have to complete a FAFSA for all of our state aid programs. And I'm going to show you on this next screen. This is a listing of our state financial aid programs. And what I have down below in the square is a QR code. So if you have your smartphone handy, you're able to just hover over that QR code, and that will take you directly to our publication, which is also on your screen, the Do You Need Money for College flyer. So this outlines all of our state financial aid programs. Again, I've got them up here, bulleted on your screen, but things like our Children of Veterans Tuition Grant, this provides tuition assistance to the children of Michigan veterans who are totally or permanently disabled, missing in action, or deceased. Next, the Fostering Futures Scholarship. This is for any students who may have experienced time in foster care at the age of 13 or older here in Michigan. So if you think you might be eligible, definitely check out this flyer for more info. And then you remember earlier when we were talking through FAFSA, and I said there were 2 state aid programs that had the March 1st FAFSA deadline. That was for the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, MCS, and the Michigan Tuition Grant, MTG. So MCS, that provides tuition assistance to students who scored a 1200 or higher on the SAT. So keep that in mind. Michigan Tuition Grant, or MTG, that provides tuition assistance to students that are attending a Michigan private or independent college or university. So for any of you students who might be looking at any of those private colleges or universities here in Michigan, definitely get that FAFSA in so that you can take advantage of MTG. Now, the last 2, police officers and firefighters survivor tuition grant, that provides a waiver of tuition for the children and surviving spouses of Michigan police officers and firefighters killed in the line of duty. And then the last one, the Tuition Incentive Program, or TIP, that provides assistance to Michigan students who have received Michigan Medicaid for 24 months in a 36-month window. So between the ages of 9, we're looking all the way from age 9 to high school graduation. So I just want to share a little bit more information about our state aid programs before we dive into TIP a little bit more, but I just want to show you what I have up on the screen. This is our eligibility, our additional eligibility requirements for our state financial aid programs. And you'll notice one of the requirements that we have highlighted in blue is the FAFSA, right? So for all of our financial aid programs, students have to complete the FAFSA. So definitely check that out. Know that the additional eligibility requirements are all available on our website as well, and on our fact sheets. So we talked through some of this earlier. We said that we got that March 1st deadline for the Michigan Competitive Scholarship and for the Michigan Tuition Grant. So that deadline is tomorrow. So again, any students who think they might be eligible for MCS or MTG, for priority consideration, definitely get that FAFSA in tomorrow. Now, for all other state aid programs, students just have to file before the federal deadline. Now, the last kind of section on your screen about FAFSA college order is super important. You remember earlier when we were talking through FAFSA, and I mentioned there's an area on your FAFSA where you can list up to 10 colleges and universities that you're interested in. So in that area, you're going to list those schools. Again, you can list up to 10. But what's important for you to know is that to be considered for state aid programs, the state, what we're going to do is we're going to always look at what school you listed first. So we're going to look at what school you listed first on the FAFSA, and we know that may change. For instance, maybe I listed Eastern Michigan first, but now I've decided that I'm going to go to Washtenaw Community College. There's a couple things that I can do to update that. I can log back into my FAFSA, and then I can just rearrange my schools. I'll push WCC to the top of my list. And then that way I know, the state of Michigan knows, oh, I'm here at WCC. Another way is I can do it through my portal account, and I'll show you a little bit about the student portal account in a bit. or you can just contact our customer care center. So by contacting our customer care center, they can update the school that you're attending over the phone. So again, just keep in mind that we're going to always look at what school you listed first on your FAFSA. So TIP, the Tuition Incentive Program. So I said that I wanted to talk a little bit more about TIP, and that's because TIP is our largest program that we administer through the state of Michigan. And there's a lot of students and families that just don't know about TIP or don't know much about it. So I want to share some info. And again, what we have up on your screen is we've got the TIP flyer as well as the QR code next to it. So feel free to use your smartphone, use your camera, and that'll take you directly to our publication. But again, TIP is a program for eligible students who either have had or might have previously had Michigan Medicaid coverage for 24 months in a 36-month period. So we're looking again from age 9 all the way to high school graduation. And this is something that we're working with the Department of Health and Human Services on. So looking to see if at any point between age 9 and high school graduation, if the student was receiving Michigan Medicaid. The nice thing is there's no special application required for TIP. You just have to make sure you're completing high school before you turn 20. That's the big thing. And then you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, the really advantageous or beneficial thing about TIP, especially for students who maybe aren't sure what they want to do after high school, maybe they want to take a little break before they enroll in college, is that you have 4 years from the time you graduate high school to start using TIP. So again, if you're TIP eligible, you don't have to be ready to go right away after high school. You have 4 years to kind of get that plan in place and start using TIP. And then once you start using TIP, once you receive that first TIP payment, you have 10 years before your remaining TIP benefits expire. So giving you more time to get that degree, to get that, credential, and utilize TIP. So TIP is split into 2 phases, and I'll just apologize because I'm going to kind of move through this fast because I don't have a lot of time left. But if you're looking at that TIP flyer, you'll notice that they've split TIP into 2 phases. Phase 1, that's going to be in the student's freshman year and sophomore year. So you'll see the first example, if they're a community college here in Michigan that accepts TIP phase 1, that means TIP for the student is going to cover the in-district tuition rate plus $250 in mandatory fees at that institution. If the student is looking at a Michigan independent college or university here in the state that also participates or accepts phase 1, then TIP is going to cover the cost of tuition at what we call the average community college in-district rate. Basically, each year we look at the average in-district rate across the community colleges, and then we take that average. So this year it's $118 per credit hour plus $250 in mandatory fees at those Michigan independent colleges. And then there are 5 public universities here in the state of Michigan that participate in TIP phase 1. And at those schools, TIP's going to cover the lower level resident rate plus $250 in mandatory fees. Now, some important things to mention. Some of you might be looking at certificate programs, knowing that if you're looking at a certificate program, keep in mind to use TIP, the certificate program must be a minimum of 24 semester credits and 1 academic year. So an academic year is a period of about 30 weeks of instructional time. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking at a particular program, it has to be at least 24 semester credits and 1 academic year. Now, I mentioned that TIP was split into phases. So that was phase one. Phase two, much more cut and dry. Phase two is going to happen in the student's junior and senior year. So the opposite of phase one. And basically, they're going to give the student $500 in TIP in the fall of their junior year, another $500 in TIP in the winter or second semester of their junior year, and then the same their senior year. So TIP in phase two is a total of $2,000. Think of it as $1,000 in the student's junior year and $1,000 in their senior year. Now, one thing I'll say is I know there's a lot of different phases and a lot of different amounts with TIP. So if you have any questions about TIP, don't hesitate to reach out. You'll have some of our contact information at the end, but definitely with Miss Curtin, she can always put you in contact with myself or my colleague Felicia if you want to kind of talk one-on-one about TIP and how TIP looks at these different schools. Now, I mentioned we do have the My Student Aid or My SSG student portal account, and that's where you're able to go to actually see if you might be eligible for some of our programs like TIP and some of our other state aid programs. There's a QR code down here in the corner for you. That'll take you right to our My SSG student portal account. But keep in mind, to create an account, you have to have a social security number. So make sure you got that SOCH, and then either a current year FAFSA or a TIP record. So you have to have, two of those three things in order to be able to set up a MySSG student portal account. And then there's a lot of different things you can do in there. I mentioned about completing applications, finding out your eligibility status, payment status, remember updating the college on file. So there's a lot of benefits from creating that portal. So definitely check it out. And then I wanted to make sure I showed you this. So I don't know if any of you have had the chance to check out our website, but definitely check it out. It's got a lot of helpful resources out there for students and families. Basically, a lot of the things we discussed today, fact sheets on all of our program, other resources on financial aid. And one resource in particular that I wanted to highlight is our My Scholarship Search self-service tool. So you remember when we talked earlier about that fourth source of financial aid, private or third-party sources. So this scholarship search tool enables you to search for scholarships based on the county in which you reside. So these are what we would call place-based scholarships, meaning that one of the scholarship components is linked to a Michigan school, county, city, or region. So I would tell you, definitely utilize this tool, filter by the county in which you reside, and it'll generate an entire listing, in PDF form, and it'll show you all of these different links to various scholarships. So again, some of that free money that I want you all to be able to take advantage of. And then lastly, I just want to let you know we are on 3 different forms of social media. So definitely connect with us. We're at My Student Aid. So that's our handle. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. And we're on Facebook. So we are putting different information on our social media accounts. We're definitely pushing a lot of scholarships right now. I know I'm coming across different scholarships down here, especially in the Washtenaw County area. So definitely check out our social media because we'll put some helpful info on there directing, students to different scholarships, letting reminders, deadlines. And this is our customer care center contact info. So remember I mentioned if you have any follow-up questions, maybe you have a question on TIP or one of our other financial aid programs, don't hesitate. You can email us, you can call us, and we'll help talk through any questions you have. But woo, that was financial aid 101 in a nutshell in an hour, and I came in just under time. So, I hope this was a helpful start. There's a lot that goes into financial aid, but I hope this was just, again, something to kind of get you thinking about next steps, and what all is really out there to help pay for school.
And there are a bunch of resources that are on the MI Student Aid website, like video tutorials for financial aid that will help you go through the process of filling out your application. So go on the website and take advantage of those items as well. Do any of you guys have any questions that you want to stick in the chat right quick?
Yeah, feel free. Thanks for the shout out, Jana. I appreciate that. I'm glad it was helpful. Well, and sometimes things come up later. So I totally recognize if you have some time to digest all this information I gave you and you're like, oh, I should have asked that. Don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, I know Miss Cureton's here. She knows myself. She knows Felicia. So she can always, put you in contact with either one of us if you had follow-up questions on anything. We're here to help. We just want you to know that college is accessible, affordable, and attainable. You just have to look for some of those different sources of funding.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we are going to bring this to a close. Thank you so much, Emily. Great information. Awesome presentation. Thank you guys for joining. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself if you take a quick snapshot of the information on the screen, you will then have direct access to MI Student Aid's web portal, where you can get all kinds of resources and information on all the things that Emily talked about today. Thank you guys so much for joining. Again, thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You guys have a great day. Bye now.